With more than 300,000 visitors per year, Château of Vaux-le-Vicomte is the most visited private estate in France. "76 meters long, 33 meters wide, and 23 meters high, its total surface area exceeds that of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris."
In the 17th century, Place de Vaux was a pivotal square. It centred it chronologically. It was a castle strictly from the mid-17th century, and it was especially important at a time when architecture was considered the first of the arts.
Vaux-le-Vicomte is a theatrical project that is designed to be fundamentally apprehended, perceived, admired, observed, all in the same axis.
Facing due south, its centerpiece, the large oval hall, 18 meters high, facing 40 hectares of nature entirely man-made, the equivalent of 3 times the surface area of the Champs-Élysées.
We have a real harmony between a huge and fabulously well-designed garden and an architecture that will be the center of it.
There's a relationship between space and the horizon. It was planned right from the beginning. There's no other way.
Inseparable from the castle, the monumental terraces of the gardens take place on an axis of 1,300 meters. The focus of this composition is the statue of Hercules, 15 meters high. It is at the same altitude and in the same axis as the ground floor of the castle. In between, the garden houses many buildings of often gigantic dimensions. Like the Great Canal, 1 kilometer long and 35 meters wide.
There is a will to modify the landscape, to structure the landscape that is just extraordinary. And where Vaux is absolutely fascinating is that there is a demonstration of power through this absolute modification of the area.
So what power should this masterpiece serve? How was it built? By what techniques? To answer these questions, we must go back to the 17th century, at a key moment, a turning point in the history of France. The history of this extraordinary estate began in the middle of the 17th century. (1648). While King Louis XIV was only 9 years old, power was exercised by his mother, the regent, Anne of Austria, and especially by his prime minister, Cardinal Mazarin. The country is on the brink of collapse, stuck since 1635 in an endless and costly war against Spain.
What that involves is a war on perhaps 6 or 7 different fronts on the frontiers of France. A military commitment of perhaps 100,000 troops, and a war which lasts.
The state of finances is disastrous. France is bled dry and is chasing after money. There is a considerable monetary famine.
In order to continue the war, the Prime Minister, Cardinal Mazarin, must raise more and more taxes. But in Paris, a revolt breaks out against the government. This rebellion will turn into a civil war that will last 5 years. For many of the kingdom's subjects, this conflict changes everything. Beginning with one man, the steward of the Paris region, Nicolas Fouquet.
This is a very prestigious role, and it gives him responsibility for looking after food supplies, managing the army billeting in and around Paris, tax collection in Paris.
And Nicolas Fouquet is above all an ambitious man. His ambition, which would give birth to the castle of Vaux-le-Vicomte, was inherited from his family. A wealthy family from Anjou, whose coats of arms still dot the facades of the building.
So Fouquet in the old Anjou dialect means squirrel. That's why they took the coat of arms with a little squirrel, a little Fouquet, climbing on them. And hence this motto, Quo non ascendet? To what heights can we not ascend?
To what heights can we not ascend? Fouquet knows the rebellion could slow his ascension to power. At 34 years old, Nicolas Fouquet must therefore make a radical and very political choice: support Cardinal Mazarin or choose the side of the rebels.
He has to make that decision, and on that basis, his future career is going to depend.
1653. The rebels were defeated by Mazarin and royal power. In order to thank Fouquet for his unconditional support, Mazarin graced him with one of the most prestigious positions in the kingdom: Superintendent of Finance, the equivalent of a current Minister for Finance.
The superintendent was the one who had relationships with financial groups that were very powerful at the time and did not trust the state.
His mission as head of the country's finances is impossible: to find from the financiers the money that would allow France to continue the war against Spain. And for that, he needs a prestigious castle.
Part of his strategy to reassure the financiers.
When the good health of a kingdom is visible, the donors reopen the coffers. That was the goal of Vaux-le-Vicomte.
There are many castles synonymous with power and prestige around Paris. But where to build your own castle? Fouquet owns a piece of land, the Visconti of Vaux, located about 20 kilometers from the royal castle of Fontainebleau. An ideal location that would allow him to receive the king and the court. But the work to be done there promises to be a daunting task.
This ground, it's an ungrateful ground. It's a deep basin, it's at the bottom of a valley, it's a ground without a view, it's not easy.
Over an area of about 40 hectares, there is an old manor house, a hamlet, and most noticeably 2 valleys, each with its own stream. The Bobet stream on the northeast-southwest axis, itself a tributary of the Ancueil River, which crosses the estate on an east-west axis.
He had a kind of futuristic vision of things, and he thinks to himself, I will completely reclaim the valley and modify it entirely.
If Nicolas Fouquet can afford this luxury, it is because he has a nice little fortune thanks to his wife's dowry. But how can this ungrateful valley be transformed into a masterpiece with a majestic castle and sumptuous gardens?
You have a whole staff, as we would say today, who will help Fouquet to produce a masterpiece. It's not the work of a demiurge, the creator, but the work of an organization.
Among these men, the architect Louis XIV and the gardener André Le Nôtre, the future builders of Versailles. What exactly were their respective roles? History doesn't say. The only certainty is that the work began in 1653 under the auspices of a project manager, Daniel Gittard. First step, prepare the ground. And in particular, build the foundations of the future castle, the dimensions of which have been fixed, 76 meters long and 33 meters wide. It will be preceded by a main courtyard 45 meters wide and 56 meters long, itself flanked by 2 terraces. Therefore, in total, 6,400 square meters of ground that will have to be laid. But Vaux's terrain poses a problem. Situated on a groundwater table, it is full of clay, a rocky material that could endanger the building.
The castle is founded in marlstone, and this has a particularity. It can dry very, very quickly, and it cracks. Therefore, if we do not hold in the water in the surrounding marlstone of the castle, there will be a cracking of the ground and a destructuring, which can lead to a degradation of the castle.
How can a castle be built on land so sensitive to variations in humidity? The answer may lie in one of its most surprising characteristics. These moats with a medieval look have a total water surface of 7,000 square meters, a structure that allows the ground on which the building rests to remain moist.
These are moats that have been bricked up and waterproofed with clay. It is an entirely artificial structure.
What is very surprising is that the level of the moat remains permanently constant. Even in 2018, when it didn't rain for several months, the water of the moat didn't move at all, which may lead to the idea that there are many springs that reappear at the bottom of the basin, at the bottom of the moat, and that keeps the level constant.
These moats may have had another use, a function witnessed by these arrow slits, unexpected on the outsides of a stately castle.
Very clearly, these moats are equipped with firing stations. We must not forget that when the castle begins in 53, we have just left the rebel wars, a war that resulted in burnt castles, looted castles, families who have been worried because they were not safe in their homes. So we have a castle that keeps some notions of defense that will disappear a generation later, but are still very real.
Along with the moat, the workers had to build the huge brick structure that would form the basement of the castle. 18 rooms spread over more than 1,500 square meters, including many facilities, such as kitchens and wine cellars. But which material should be chosen to ensure waterproofness and solidity at the ever-important base of the structure? Daniel Gittard, the main contractor, will find the answer very close by. In this region near Fontainebleau were a particularly solid rock outcrops, sandstone.
We always have the hardest stones in the lower parts, since they undergo two huge levels of compression. And so the harder the stone is, the more durable the rock is, and it will not crack. But it has a disadvantage. That is, it's not made to be a carving stone.
Sandstone has this quality of being extremely strong, extremely economical, to not pump out water, and being a fantastically healthy stone. It will be used for landscaping and on the moats at all the lower part of the castle.
The construction of these foundations will be accompanied by those of the two common bodies. Buildings intended for the management of the castle, which will initially be used to house the workers employed on the site. Among them, new teams are setting out to prepare the ground for the gardens. Everything still needs to be done. Starting by imagining how to transform this ungrateful terrain, a mission entrusted to the gardener André Le Nôtre.
Le Nôtre has a real ability to see the landscape, and especially to see how he can transform it. So above all, he will see the potential of the site and see how he can use that potential.
And he'll be able to exploit this constraint to make Vaux-le-Vicomte the first garden to have a total landscape.
The landscape will be installed on the north-south axis as defined by the castle. Thanks to the terraces, it will follow the natural slope of the land up to the Ancueil River. The focus of the composition will be on the other side of the river at the level of the statue of Hercules, perfectly aligned with the ground floor of the castle. The result will be a landscape that is completely man-made. The model par excellence of the French garden.
The construction of Vaux is reusing an entire valley. It's putting oneself on an equal footing with God. As one modifies the territory, one takes power over the territory.
How did 17th century men achieve this grandiose result? The answer to this question can be found in the mysteries of the castle of Vaux-le-Vicomte. A few dozen meters from the castle, under the trees that line its gardens, a gigantic underground vault 800 meters long.
This vault dates from the 17th century, so of course it's been repaired. It's been renovated and there are places where stones have fallen and they've been replaced. It's the principle of a vaulted cellar. It's the vaulted arch that holds the land, so it's both very simple and very ambitious.
This work alone embodies the scope of the construction carried out in this field. It owes its existence to the first obstacle encountered by Le Nôtre in building gardens.
From the moment it was decided on this perpendicular and a whole geometric composition on it, there's still a big problem. In the middle, there's a small stream, a tributary of the Ancoy that crosses, and we don't want it.
This is Beaubay's stream. To divert it, the workers dug an aqueduct in the direction of l'Ancoy along the hill located to the east of the estate. Once dug, it will divert water from the Beaubay stream. In order to avoid its obstruction by plant waste, the aqueduct was then covered with this stone vault. A work carried out by hand by an unknown number of workers. Once the Beaubay stream has been diverted, the workers will have to reshape the slope of the valley to transform it into north-south facing terraces. But how can the design be accurately transferred to the site? For this purpose, in 1597, Le Nôtre has a tool invented, the particularly effective pinule graphometer.
This device, which has a wonderful name, is in fact a kind of protractor with two sighting systems that allow extremely precise lines to be defined over kilometers. We have this targeted definition that will make it possible to transfer an angle and a layout that has been planned on paper to the field. It is the key instrument that will allow the great drawings of the 17th century to be laid out.
Once the plots have been determined using the pinule graphometer, sticks are fixed on the field to delimit the contours, while ropes will help to locate the levels to be reached. Once these levels are defined, a huge amount of excavated soil and earth embankments will be put in place to achieve the final result.
The absolute rule is no excessive displacement of land. That's the formula.
The main skill is to manage the most and the least, to dig one place, to backfill another, because bringing earth from elsewhere is crazy.
In total, tens of thousands of cubic meters of clay soil will have to be moved over an area of about 40 hectares. A colossal task carried out thanks to the presence of 900 workers hired locally by the project manager, Daniel Gittard.
So you have to imagine a little bit of Chinese-style construction. We almost only have this example today of thousands of people carrying basket by basket this clay that is excessively heavy, that is really difficult. Someone takes a basket, fills it up, passes it, passes it, passes it. We make human chains like that. It prevents people who are in the mud from having to make too much effort when walking, etc. So it's a way of reducing fatigue on the construction site.
But how can we ensure that this new site, which has been completely remodeled by man, is maintained? The answer lies in the many brickwork structures. They will serve as retaining walls like this confessional, which is 2 stories high.
Some of the decorations we see are not just decorations. In fact, they are, so to speak, with our 21st century language, more like decorating engineering elements.
But all these gigantic projects will come at a cost. Financial, certainly, but especially human, with the deaths of many workers.
Maybe it's 100 dead. The records sometimes show that people in poor circumstances arrive at this place and are there as kind of adventurers to serve as laborers on major construction sites.
Nicolas Fouquet follows this major project from Paris, too busy trying to solve the economic crisis in which France is stuck. A crisis whose solution could, according to him, be the completion of Vaux-le-Vicomte. (1654). Nicolas Fouquet has managed to find money to continue the war by gradually devaluing the currency.
The idea was to get the gold and silver out of the piggy banks, and it was a technically very successful operation in 1654 with a progressive devaluation of this currency. So the more you kept your money to yourself, the more it lost value from the top, from where obviously everyone was rushing to get out these coins to lend them to the king.
Despite the success of this operation, the outlook for peace with Spain is still far off, and the situation seems to be in an impasse more than ever. Fouquet especially wanted to get rid of Abel Servien, another faithful of Mazarin, with whom he shared his position, and under whose control he had been placed.
Servien's not actually very good at raising money. He doesn't have the confidence of the financiers. His personality is difficult. He can't charm people.
In order to get rid of the ineffective Servien, Fouquet tried to convince Mazarin to give him carte blanche. His idea? Rather than borrowing in the name of the crown in which the financiers do not trust, he proposes to borrow this money in his own name, and then to lend it to the state.
If you lend to Fouquet, you're dealing with someone who seems charming, who's persuasive, who seems to have these large assets in the form of these great estates being built, who everyone knows has a huge income. So Fouquet, in a way, is a much more attractive proposition as someone to lend money to than the crown. And Fouquet is basically promoted in practice, if not in name, to becoming the finance minister.
From 1655, Fouquet found himself hands-free at the head of state finances. Vaux-le-Vicomte will now play a considerable role. It will be the embodiment of Fouquet's fortune and his solvency with financiers. The castle will therefore not only have to be built very quickly, but also shine through its innovative and avant-garde character.
Nicolas Fouquet's strength is to say you have to display luxury, show that you are a powerful, sumptuous figure, that you are at ease. So you have to reassure the financial community.
So how can we impress the audience? To build the rest of this exceptional residence, the architect Louis XIV will be able to count on his talent and his extensive knowledge of the Italian Renaissance.
He is already a recognized architect. He had an important career in Paris. He built a lot. He made the main hotels of the great financiers or the great Parisian parliamentarians. He became, above all, the king's first architect.
Le Vaux will propose a revolutionary project. Until then, French stately castles were built according to the so-called simple dwelling model. Its principle: the pieces follow one another in a row over a single thickness of structure. Le Vaux will have the idea of doubling this thickness, something that has never been done for a castle before. With this doubling, the rooms will now be gathered in a building twice as wide. It is this unusual thickness for a castle that will make Vaux-le-Vicomte an extraordinary building.
You have a huge architectural sculpture with a whole diversity of fantastically rich forms, fantastically dense in its volumes, in its sculpture. You really have reached a pinnacle there.
Above all, thanks to the thickness of the building, Le Vaux will be able to provide his castle with two radically different facades, and thus offer two castles for the price of one.
On the courtyard side, you have this facade not only concave, but also with pavilions that seem to dominate the central part. On the garden side, it is strictly the opposite. You have a convex facade with a central part that dominates the side pavilions. A whole diversity to transform a mass that could have been boring into something tremendously adapted to the gigantic site they are about to create.
Thanks to this diversity of spaces, Le Vaux will create a unique architectural experience. It will start as soon as you arrive at the castle. We're in front of the north facade. The visitor will clearly see through three arcades the focal point of the garden. A statue of Hercules, which is actually located 1,233 meters away.
We can't turn our eyes away from it. It's like a magnet, since there's a very interesting light from the south behind it, while everything here is in darkness. So already the gaze is focused by these three arcades.
This theatrical journey continues immediately in the castle with a major surprise. "18 meters high, 18 meters long, 11 meters wide. The grand hall will be the showpiece of the castle."
This great space, where you are fully at home and which is absolutely sumptuous, which is both in the axis towards the gardens and in the axis of the lateral functioning of the house, is an absolutely sensational solution.
A panoramic view on the gardens, the open gates, Hercules in the distance, the sun. Here we take in the full view.
Le Vaux innovates on the outside, but the inside of the castle is just as revolutionary. With stately apartments arranged not on the first floor, as is customary, but on the ground floor around a large hall. On the west side, those of Superintendent Fouquet. On the east side are those intended for the king when he visits him. All the rooms on the ground floor will be arranged in a staggered pattern to facilitate easy access. As the reception floor is on the ground floor, Le Vaux will not create a large formal staircase, but two modest ones. One on each side of the vestibule. To these will be added service stairs at the ends of the building. The first floor, where the private apartments of the superintendent and his wife will be located, will be served by a modern distribution artery of unique efficiency, the corridor.
All the hotels in the world are made like this. Central corridor, service stairs at the end, main stairs in the middle, bedroom on the left, bedroom on the right and left.
On y est.
Nicolas Fouquet triggered this innovative castle's construction in August 1656. That month he signed the £700,000 estimate proposed by Louis XIV. After a month of preparation, the structural work began in September of the same year. From the ground floor to the loft, it will take only 13 months.
Today, if you tell any contractor that Vaux-le-Vicomte from beginning to end took 13 months to build, he'll say, no, it's not possible. It's crazy.
Under the direction of the contractor, Michel Villedot, masons, stonemasons, blacksmiths, and carpenters converged on the superintendent's site.
In the mid-17th century, major contractors such as Villedot had the capacity of hundreds of stonemasons, carpenters and roofers to work in optimized coordination.
So how did Levaux, Villedot and their workers manage to build Vaux-le-Vicomte in just 13 months? To do this, they developed a methodical plan. They began by building the north wall of the large hall located in the heart of the building.
It's this wall that will allow the vestibule, the hall itself, and from there the stairwells to be secured. And all of this forms a single block. And from this hard core, which is entirely made of stone, the rest of the building can be added.
But which type of stone to choose to give nobility to the building? Levaux will use one of the most noble, the so-called cray stone. A chalky material that is less heavy than the sandstone used in the lower parts. It is said to have come from quarries near Ravière in the Yonne region and have been transported by river to Merlin a few kilometers away from Vaux.
We gain in weight and pressure, and above all, we can have the finesse of size we want, especially capitals, pediments, cornices, false joints, everything.
The most common construction in Île-de-France is a construction in plaster, mortar, plastered wood. Building in stone is an ostentatious luxury that only the wealthiest and the king allowed themselves.
Fouquet wants Vaux-le-Vicomte to become one of the most beautiful residences in the kingdom. He is willing to go to great lengths to achieve this. Despite the initial estimate proposed by Levaux, the cost will soar and the superintendent cannot ignore it.
I calculated between the garden and the construction of the castle, and it comes to about £4 million, which is a colossal sum. Fouquet normally only earns £150,000 with all his expenses and income. So it's obvious that he drew from everywhere to build this castle.
In addition to his position as superintendent, Fouquet is a very active businessman. He will acquire many lands in Brittany in order to enhance his income. But to increase his capital, he will also use much more violent means. Pirates.
He's going to fight a pirate war, to get rich by looting Dutch ships and selling them. Fouquet had a base in Concarneau, and the ships that were taken from the Dutch arrived in Concarneau, and then the goods were dispatched to the rest of France and were sold. There was a whole lot of trafficking organized like that.
The Superintendent of Finance will also take advantage of his position to make money at the expense of the state by playing on the interest rates from which he borrows money.
The superintendent will get rich by borrowing money at fairly moderate rates, 10, 15% at that time. And then he will lend at higher rates to the state, which is strictly prohibited.
If he allows himself all these deviations, it is also because in the mid-17th century, they are the norm at the head of the state. This is evidenced by the greed of the Prime Minister, Cardinal Mazarin. He seeks to rebuild the fortune he lost during the rebel war and does not hesitate to loot and cheat, including with the accounts of the state.
Mazarin's thefts are charges, they're jewels, they are the titles, the lands, they're the boarding of the boats, the money trafficking. He buys land with the king's coffers, but doesn't tell the queen. He lies all the way.
To build this fortune, which will soon be equivalent to that of Holland, Mazarin relies on his personal steward, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He would also not hesitate to force Fouquet to become an accomplice to his misdeeds.
Colbert pressures Fouquet to give quickly. We need money without papers, without anything. Hurry, no receipts. Don't worry, we will remember it. Forced into a corner, Fouquet gives them money.
For Nicolas Fouquet, these small deals are a necessary evil until Mazarin disappears and he takes his place as head of government. With this new ambition, Vaux-le-Vicomte could be one of his best assets.
Fouquet wanted to become the next prime minister, so he wanted to demonstrate to the king his qualities by the prowess of his project, that he was intelligent, that he had an extraordinary vision of modernity and innovation, and that these qualities could also serve the kingdom.
Spring 1657. Just a few months after the start of the work, the walls of the castle are rising at a phenomenal rate. But the number of materials to be distributed on the entire site is increasingly significant and imposing.
If we had to assemble the wood that would make the dome or even the things by the stairs with beams that are like that are 70 centimeters high, how did they do it?
So how can we distribute the materials on site without damaging the already finished facades? The solution proposed by Levaux: postpone the construction of the dome until later and use the walls of the 18-meter-high large hall as a supply well. It is here that a machine known since antiquity is installed in the framework: the squirrel wheel.
And so we used this existing structure to then bring up materials and distribute these materials east, west and north to build and arrange the interiors of the first and second floors and then the framework.
This is absolutely exceptional site intelligence. And once again, we have the best of the 17th century.
Once the walls are raised, the workers will assemble the building's frames. But how do you cover a building twice as thick as the castles usually built? Louis Levaux's answer: the gabled loft. Instead of simple beams, the trusses of the structure will be composed of two beams. A solution that has the advantage of allowing the loft to be inhabited, but also of creating a tension with those of the rest of the building.
You have a festival of shapes given to the loft. We have forgotten that in the logic of Levaux in the 17th century, the loft has the same value as a facade.
Among these lofts is a treasure worthy of a battleship: the frame of the dome. Built on the ground, its elements have been assembled in height in the manner of a cathedral structure.
I'm always admiring the work that was done, because in the end, the carpenter is none other than the carpenter of the local village.
While work continues in the castle, the workers still have to shape the look of the gardens. Le Nôtre wants to create a landscape like we have never seen before. But how can we make ordinary terraces a unique spatial experience? The answer? A gigantic trompe-l'œil.
From the terrace of the castle to the statue of Hercules that you can see there, you have almost a kilometre, something you can't guess from here at all. And even knowing it, you have the impression that it's 500–600 meters to Hercules.
How did Le Nôtre achieve this amazing result? First trick, the landscape gardener played on the angles of view created by the terraces, which hide the differences in level and thus give the illusion of a flat landscape. The second step is to play with the shape of the garden's fixtures in the same way as its ponds. The further away they are, the bigger they will seem. Seen from the castle, they looked modest in size, creating the illusion of a much shorter garden. After having deceived the visitor with this false perspective, Le Nôtre will reserve some major surprises for its visitors. Invisible from the castle, the visitor will only discover them at the last moment.
From the castle, we have the impression that the grottos are at the end of the garden, that we'll go down a few steps, that we're going to get there quite easily. But that's not the case at all.
The reason for this? The arrival into the landscape of a gigantic canal 1 kilometer long and 35 meters wide.
From the castle, we would never have suspected that there's a canal there.
It was in 1659 that work on the Grand Canal began. To construct it, the workers widened the bed of the Ancueil River before building its banks. All this work makes Vaux a place teeming with activity. Activity that will attract the attention of Nicolas Fouquet's worst enemy.
Si Colbert se rend à Vaux, c'est bien parce que...
If Colbert is aware of Vaux, it's because he wants to see for himself the level of expenditure, to obviously highlight the misdeeds of the superintendent, who spends more than is reasonable and therefore plunders the state.
Qui pille l'État.
Colbert wants to expose the superintendent's schemes because he wants to take his place. So how can Fouquet be discredited? To this end, Colbert wrote a brief in 1659 for the Prime Minister, Cardinal Mazarin. A document in which he discusses the questionable management of the state's finances by the superintendent.
The intermingling of private and public funds, the use of favoured cartel of financiers who are getting extremely good deals on loan policies, all sorts of general allegations, of course, of misappropriation of funds, with Vaux, of course, looming as part of this.
So from that moment on, war is declared between the two men.
Once the brief was intercepted by Fouquet's staff, the superintendent became aware of the threat hanging over him. How to react? By doing everything possible to assure the Prime Minister of his good conduct. But everything changed on March 9th, 1661, with the death of Cardinal Mazarin. To everyone's surprise, Louis XIV, now 22 years old, decided to rule without a Prime Minister. Fouquet and Colbert were kept in government, and the government now had no choice but to permanently take Fouquet out of the equation.
For Colbert, this is really an existential moment. Sooner or later, all of this information about the accumulation of Mazarin's fortune is going to come out.
Colbert wanted him out of the way, because he knew Mazarin's secrets. So he had to be eliminated. That's all it was, just that.
Spring 1661, the plot was set up. The first step for Colbert? Reveal Fouquet's malpractice to Louis XIV.
Colbert says, look, sire, the superintendent always borrows astronomical sums at extortionate rates. It is always the maxim of disorder that prevails. It is time for you to take charge of your affairs.
Blinded by his own success, Nicolas Fouquet does not realize anything. In Vaux-le-Vicomte, in the opulent antechamber of his stately apartment, he is represented as a triumphant Hercules by the painter Charles Lebrun.
He may feel confident enough by now. He is loved by the court. He expects Vaux-le-Vicomte to become a great cultural centre. He seems to have everyone on his side.
Colbert must now convince Louis XIV to eliminate the superintendent. This was done on May 4th, 1661, with a decision to arrest Fouquet in September. The ultimate act of this tragedy took place in Vaux on August 17th, 1661. On that day, Fouquet is organizing a celebration that embodies the legend of Vaux-le-Vicomte. In front of Fouquet, Louis XIV did not reveal anything about the plot at work.
So an extraordinary celebration, a fury takes hold of the king, who tells Anne of Austria, Madame, we will not be able to give back everything to all these people.
The drama was being played out during those moments. But Fouquet, drunk with power and ambition, saw nothing coming and was, to put it mildly, the first to be surprised when he was arrested by D'Artagnan on the 5th of September 1661 in Nantes.
Arrested by the most famous musketeer lieutenant in history, D'Artagnan, Fouquet was imprisoned in the Bastille while awaiting trial. Vaux-le-Vicomte will be the collateral victim of the superintendent's arrest, as evidenced by the unfinished state of some of its sculptures.
We can well imagine this day when the sculptors were still working on the faces and had to put down their tools and leave, when the king ordered the castle to be closed and put it under seal.
Vaux-le-Vicomte is a man's unfulfilled dream. Yesterday, still one of the most powerful in the kingdom, in 1663, Fouquet was sentenced to life imprisonment. He died alone, far from his family, in the citadel of Pignerol in 1680. Even though he burned his wings flying too close to power, no one can take away his legacy to the history of architecture.
Vaux is a wonderful architectural achievement. It is the result of a stone architecture. It is the result of a massive architecture with a whole diversity of fantastically rich, fantastically dense forms in its volumes, in its moldings, in its sculpture.
Built in 13 months and equipped with gardens unlike any other, Vaux-le-Vicomte has paved the way. Thanks to the architect Louis Levaux, the landscape architect André Le Nôtre, and the painter Charles Lebrun, Vaux has shown like no other castle before it in the 17th century how art can serve power.
Louis XIV was not to be deceived. Fouquet is arrested, we take everything in Vaux-le-Vicomte, we take the whole team, and now it's Versailles.